What does it take to make exceptional digital products? How can one product leave us feeling content and keep us on it for hours while others drive us away in just a few clicks? This week on Low-Key Legends, we will learn from product veterans Zeke Shore and Ian Lord, co-founders of TypeCode. TypeCode designs and builds digital products and experiences, collaborating with ambitious clients like A24, Google, MoMA, Scholastic, Disney, and MIT to bring powerful ideas to life. Finding clever solutions to hard problems while making things beautiful, intuitive, functional, and effective. All the characteristics of a great product. In this episode, we explore how product design has shifted over the past 15 plus years and the difference between a good and a great product. Diving into the depths of data and how we can leverage it to shape stories and success metrics for our clients. There's a ton of insights to come, so let's get into the episode with Zeke and Ian from TypeCode. Zeke, Ian, thank you guys so much for being here. I'm super excited to chat. We met at the Webbies. We kind of bumped into each other, I think literally coming out of the bathroom. So it's great to have that interesting mutual experience bonding at the Webbies, not in the bathroom. And then, having you guys go.
Thank you very much for having us. We're excited to be here and excited for anyone who is choosing to listen to this and hopefully sticking around.
I appreciate anyone who spends, an hour 30 with us and listens to the whole thing. So kudos to all of them. But one thing that I thought was amazing that you had shared with me when we first met was your experience of your company retreat. So how did your most recent company retreat go in kind of juxtaposition to your last one?
So our most recent company retreat was fantastic. We gathered our whole team in upstate New York in a lovely VRBO rental and had a lot of wonderful bonding around the fire pit and getting to know each other IRL when we're mostly remote and distributed. So that was great. Stark comparison to our previous retreat where the house burned down the first night of the retreat. And it's not something I would recommend for your team retreat. There was some unintentional bonding that came out of us all going through a very traumatic experience together. But if I could choose between the house burning down and not burning down, I would choose the house not burning down.
Well, didn't you say people's cars caught fire too?
Yeah, the quick version of the story is that when we arrived at the rental house, there was some workers doing work on the outside of the house, catching up paint and whatnot. And the running theory is that rags with paint thinner had been tossed into a garbage bin in the garage, which then spontaneously combusted around 9:30 or so p.m. So most of the team was on the other side of the house, outside, hanging around the hot tub, chit-chatting, maybe a couple of adult beverages into our systems at that point, and our project manager came running through the house into the backyard, exclaiming that the garage was on fire. And so we quickly all got into dry clothing and scrambled away from the house, and it erupted into a big burning fire. And the Great Barrington, Massachusetts Police Department expediently arrived and put the fire out. But it kind of put a very quick damper on the rest of the team bonding experiences that we had planned out.
Yeah, trauma bonding and arson and everything else.
Yeah. For the record, we were fully cleared of arson.
You've been doing this 14 years. How has product design in your eyes changed and shifted over the course of time? What things have you maybe negatively seen impacted, and what are some of the positive changes that you've seen over the course of that decade plus?
So if I think back to the early years of TypeCode, and I had a sort of more traditional design school background, and then sort of being in the environment of Google, which is sort of product design on as big of a scale as probably existed back then. Uh, there was a lot of there was a relatively academic approach to product design that I came up on, and here's how you do user research, and then we do an information architecture process, and then we wireframe, and then we do user testing, and then we start visual design. And there's a lot of value to going through those steps to varying degrees, and the value of each of those steps swings depending on the client or what you're trying to learn. And it's all sort of various flavors of information gathering, synthesizing that information, iterating through potential solutions, and then ultimately executing. Um, as product design, I think, matured as a discipline, and there was more practitioners, and the barrier to entry got lower, and we kind of started closing that divide between there's UX researchers and UX designers and UI designers and front end developers and back end developers. As there started to be more crossover, um, it became easier to start poking holes, and it needs to be done in these steps in these ways for it to be effective. And maybe kind of a pseudo hot take on this is that a traditional UX process is the easiest way to waste a lot of money on a project, and not doing a traditional UX process can also be the easiest way to waste a lot of money on the project. And it's kind of impossible to know where on that spectrum is the right place to be on that spectrum until you've gone through it with a specific client and a specific product you're trying to build, and you've actually launched it, and you've actually seen what's successful or not. And so I think, the idea of working iteratively or agile, or any of those sort of things that start to kind of feel like tropes right now, those weren't, they existed 15 years ago, but I think the barrier to entry of the tools and the discipline convergence of someone could be a sort of full spectrum strategy UX UI person, or someone can actually own that UI development crossover, both allows more interesting, more exciting things to happen, can speed things up, but can also be a trap when we just jump right into let's make something really, really slick, and client loves it, and let's ship it, and oh my god, we built the wrong thing. It's actually not hitting any of the KPIs. So this is a long-winded way of saying I think there was a lot that was precious that we don't need to be precious about, but there was a lot that was good that we don't want to throw away at the same time.
Yeah, there were reasons all those things developed. I think the trap, as it got more formalized, that people fell into is that it's not dogma. Like some people got so into Agile that they rigidly imposed the Agile structure onto everything, and it then became half the project was about the process, not doing the actual work. And I think, yeah, that flexibility for, as Zeke mentioned, depending on each client and how they work and what the nuances of the project are really important. Like some of our successful projects, we skipped all the beginning steps and we just jumped straight into making a prototype and showing it to the client. They're like, yeah, great. Or this is what needs to change. And we can kind of short circuit a bunch of those initial steps. Obviously, that doesn't work for a lot of projects or a lot of people who have the stakeholders that need to be run up the chain. But yeah, they're all like snowflakes.
As the organization scales too, it's also just not realistic to only find and hire unicorns. Not every developer can be a full stack developer. Not every designer can and should be exceptional on strategy, UX, and UI and animation. When you find folks that can cross multiple disciplines, they're invaluable because they can bring something special to the table. But trying to figure out how to fit those puzzle pieces together of here is how we can compartmentalize aspects of this process in a way that doesn't sort of detract from the opportunity of what a single mind hitting flow state could hit on this objective as well.
When I think about product design, I think about Agile and like the buzzwords associated with it. I also think about the kind of like Netflix approach to running a sprint and then changing your entire interface like every 2 weeks. And obviously that's not what it is, but I think there's a camp of designers who think that product designers are boring. And then I think there's a camp of product designers who think that like creative web designers or developers are just like fancy flu, just doing things for the sake of being, cool. And I think that ultimately there is like some sort of divide. And obviously Twitter, you could find plenty of heated conversation about this. But I think like if we are to analyze what makes great product design, and what makes a product effective, I think that we're going to find very much the same similarities as what we would find in a great brand and what we would find in a great website or interactive experience or even like a painting. So this is all leading to the question of what do you think makes a great product from its like essential fundamental core level?
There's a world of product design right now that is plugging together design frameworks, and you can take material, you can take Apple's Hig and snap the Lego bricks together and make something that's like really solid with sort of not needing to know how to build all of these fundamental best practice patterns from scratch. We don't need to be reinventing the wheel every single time. Uh, that gets you only so far in an exceptional product experience. That's sort of the ultimate victim of the false plateau. We can sort of incrementally improve this thing so far with the set of tools that have already been handed to us to plug together. Magic starts to happen when it's leaning on those best practices and those foundations that exist, but knowledgeable enough and brave enough and have the space to take a leap and say, okay, we're going to break a known pattern for a good reason, or we're going to try something weird here because otherwise everything looks like material design. And that's where I think the other ethos like needs to be present for it everything to just not feel the same and be functional, but we don't want a world that's just functional. We want a world that's beautiful, inspiring, sparks joy. If there's going to be 20 different note-taking apps I'm trying, the one that does it a little bit more delightfully is probably going to be the one that wins because they're all functional. The other camp of I just design beautiful things that achieve marketing objectives, like that's great, like that's hard to do, that's a unique skill set. That's you might not need to necessarily understand all of the nuances of a sign up flow and what converts best. You probably do need to know what converts best to do good marketing. But there shouldn't be a war, I guess. This is my long-winded way of saying that you can have beautiful things that need to understand kind of core UX fundamentals to effectively accomplish what they need to, and like still be accessible and still work well across different devices. They're all the same fundamentals, and you also need to be willing to open up your sketchpad with a pencil and draw something if you're going to actually design a unique user flow in a way that solves the problem beyond what the design guidelines spec for you already.
Yeah, I think if something's delightful, it's delightful. If something is beautiful, it's beautiful. Obviously, that's in the eyes of the beholder. Maybe someone hates the fact that their Duolingo app is peer pressuring them to get on the app and do the damn work. But if it gets you to do the damn work, if that's your goal of learning Spanish, and there's all this incentivization through streaks and gamification, then they're pressuring you in a positive way to do what you wanted to achieve. So I think like the perspectives are the same. It's just achieving different things. And where maybe like I'm targeting emotional responses from people for a marketing incentive, you may be leaning on best practices and user flows and strategy, and then interjecting design and life and technology and animation to achieve very similar things, but maybe with different words.
Absolutely. And I think we're often trying to balance the different ends of that spectrum, even across projects at the exact same time. Uh, part of our ethos is that we avoid things like Bootstrap or sort of UI kits as much as we possibly can. When we're starting to design a new system for a new project, we go greenfield, both blank page in Figma and blank CSS file when we're developing. We really try and avoid the backing into the solution with a prescribed set of parts, which is objectively a faster way to work when you're doing product design and especially needing to iterate quickly. That said, we have clients that need to bring an idea to market as fast as they can so that we can validate it and then iterate on it. Material is great when you need to do that. We've got the design language, we've got the component library there. That is the best way to quickly iterate through a bunch of ideas and establish product market fit. And we won't shy away from that when that's what we need to do. And then once we have that little nugget of like, okay, we've got this foundation that seems like it's working. We've got some data. We can see users are engaging with it. Now is the time to overhaul our design system and inject more pizzazz into it. And it's not necessarily too late to do it at that point, but it would have been a waste of resources to do that before we knew we were building the right thing.
Ian, what do you specifically do in terms of like the process where you're starting and helping to lead a team, let's say from like blank canvas to like aspirational and big ideas?
This is one of the hardest things about our domain is trying to instill a knowledge of all ends of the process, no matter what your role in the company is. So I think a lot of the best projects come in terms of knowing what the client's needs are, knowing what our company's needs are, and know what the product's needs are. When you kind of can understand the full timeline, but also if you're a designer, the technical opportunities in the approach. We have, say, 3 months to build this. This is a tight timeline. I want to do something super visually interesting. In order to make that realistic, a designer needs to know what is achievable on the technical end, or at the very least, know when to bring a dev into the conversation early to kind of iron those things out. So I think everyone having some level of knowledge of what the others are doing is super important, but just getting each other involved in the entire process is super important for the outcome of those best projects.
One thing that's particularly interesting, and it's probably something that is shared by everyone in every industry, but I think that the tech industry in particular, there's this need to be fast, first to market. And it's like, I don't even know if you are going to be first to market in general. Is your idea that revolutionary? In some cases it is. And sometimes there's just like this desire to be fast. And like, I've always thought that it may come from like this Silicon Valley kind of perspective of creating tech and testing it and bringing it to market and then iterating. From our process at Rogue, we kind of try to take a long period of time where they may want something in a couple weeks. We're trying to do it in a couple months. Is that something that you are continually running into with potential clients, just like this insane need for speed? And then I guess if you are in that scenario, do you try to push back on the timeline, or is that something that you would even try and engage with?
We definitely push back on a timeline we feel is unrealistic. If we feel it's doable but tight, whether it's a potential client or an existing client, we let them know our thoughts. And then if they want to proceed anyways, we have a pretty frank conversation about the trade-offs they'll have to make in terms of what we can achieve in that timeline in order to make that date happen. So what's that old saying? You can have it good, fast, or cheap. Choose two of the three.
Yeah.
It's always very true.
The building the plane while you're flying it side of it is a way we try and educate a client on when a timeline might feel tighter than it should be for a specific objective. Because often we share that ethos of let's get this in front of an audience and learn and then and iterate on that. But by the same token, we really do want to give an idea space to gestate and get far enough along to see if it has legs, and that takes time. That takes uh, the space to kind of tease it out and fail a little bit before we've really known we've reached the goal that we're trying to reach. Um, we try and do a lot of cycles internally before we put something in front of the client. Like we hammer the hell out of stuff so that we try not to put ourselves in a situation where a good idea is getting shot down just because it wasn't quite packaged in a way that the client could understand it. So we sort of try and protect that a little bit to a certain extent, but we're also willing to go quick and make compromises if it's a shared understanding that, yeah, this is a compromise. We would like to do another 2 cycles on this, but we can understand there's value of getting this out the door. And the luxury of any sort of digital experience is you can always keep iterating. It's not going to print and then we've got a million copies of it and it is what it is. There's always room to continue evolving it. And especially with these longer term engagements with a client like A24, for example, we'll go through sort of 12 different versions internally before we put something in front of the client. And they're really great partners. They can sort of see where we're going with something and they won't shoot stuff down prematurely. But even still, once we get it live, we know that this will have a life of its own once it goes live, and we'll continue to do 12 more versions of this once it's out in the wild and have more feedback and know what it's trying to be and have time to do version 2 of it. And now that we know more information.
There's definitely a couple things that are really interesting to me and exciting in there. I think one thing would be the validating success and what metrics and what data are you using to enhance the experience and the overall feedback gathering and process there. And then I think the other part that may be interesting to people as well is also myself is that, is every change a new scope of work, or is it an ongoing relationship with the client, because you're setting that expectation like this will need to change, we'll have to run certain tests to see what people are thinking about this, how long do you wait? I guess like there are two questions kind of intertwined. I'll let you kind of pick the pathway, where you want to start. Like, how do you measure success and what do you know to edit and refine? And then how does that intersect with like a pricing model?
Totally. I'm going to start with the first question by building on Ian's previous answer. So Ian brought up the classic cliche we're all familiar with, the good, fast, cheap, pick 2. I think another kind of competing trifecta that we internally spout to each other is client, team, end user, pick 2. There's sort of a new flavor of that I think is especially pertinent in the product design world, maybe more so than in more marketing design or visual design world, in that, okay, we've got a finite amount of time and budget to do this thing. We have to pay people salaries. There's only so many hours we can spend working on this thing. That's kind of a hard constraint. If we didn't care about people getting paid or people not working too many hours, we could far exceed the need of the client and the need of the end user. The friction between the need of the end user and the need of the client, that's a stickier one. That's where you get into the place, those tension points of client wants us to market as fast as possible. We think we need to do more user testing, or we need to learn more, or we need to do another design round on it. Like that's where those start to butt up against each other. And so we're coming at it a little bit defensively of like, okay, if we have this much runway of just time and budget to work on this, what's a sort of safe amount of scope that will make client stakeholder happy, and we're actually confident will truly solve their problem, because it's not sort of we're done when the client approves the design and says cool, I like the way this looks, go build it. When we're bringing it through fruition, bringing it to market, and there's an expectation we're going to continue working on it and building it and growing it in market, the initial sort of design sign off is early in the process. And so knowing that we're sort of needing to balance that friction point of this is what the client wants versus this is what we know will work better. Those things sometimes being at odds with each other is a thing we need to navigate, either convincing the client otherwise or letting things sort of fail tactfully, excuse me, and knowing when it's safe to do that. So that's part of it. But then as far as we get into like the more like, did it work? That's where, yeah, we have the instrumentation and the data side of things where we're setting measurable goals and quantitative and qualitative goals as part of our strategy process when we're diving into why are we designing this, who are we designing it for, what are objectively the measurements of success going to be once this gets out the door. So once it has launched, and that's again an argument for bringing it to humans as fast as we can, where we can start looking at that and iterating on that. Yeah, it just needs to be built into the process as well. So we'll say, we've got 5,000 hours, really big project, let's say. We need to get version 1 live 3,000 hours in and have another 2,000 hours left to learn what we can learn based on this being in the wild, and have here are the features we know we're not going to build in version 1 because we need to get this live. We need to see what's working and not working and validate, like, are these the right features? Are there new things that we didn't know we needed to do, but now we do, now that we see people interacting with this for the first time. And that kind of goes back to that client stakeholder end user conflict. It's not uncommon for client to feel passionately that this is a high priority feature. And sometimes that's the challenging dialogue. Like, you might be right, but if we're not right, it's very, very expensive to launch with this feature. And so here's a way we can mitigate that risk by doing a simplified version of it, or not launching with that feature, learning, and then having that inform how that second part of the roadmap should be structured.
Thinking about like how you measure success after you launch something, and what are the factors that you're looking at in order to know that you need to refine something? Is it users are giving feedback? Is it that you're receiving feedback in some sort of way? Because that's something that's interesting to me, just because I don't really get a lot of feedback if we're producing a brand or a website, unless it's like direct from the client post, oh yeah, we need this thing, or oh, we're actually looking to change that.
So yeah, like reviewing key metrics from more granular data is certainly one. But not every project is kind of a data-driven one. Like for a client like A24, or a more marketing one, just like their happiness and satisfaction. Like for A24, sometimes it's just like making a splash and being visually interesting, or doing something that hasn't been done before. So there's sometimes like, we'll tell them like, oh, these things will convert better. And they're like, yeah, we don't care. We don't want to seem salesy, or like, yeah, but it doesn't jive with our brand, even though it might be the more profitable thing to do, which totally makes sense. And just hearing from both users and the client that it achieved that splash is always satisfying. Like we launched this membership program for them about 2 years ago, and we co-hosted a design drinks with another studio in Brooklyn a year ago. And it turns out like all the junior members of this agency were members of this A24 program. And we're like, holy shit, I didn't know anyone had actually joined this. Well, we knew how many had joined it. But and they were so excited about it. Which was a really fun thing to see, and not something we get to experience every day. And then, again, with a company like them, they do have such passionate fans that seeing things on Reddit, them complaining about things, or, I mean, always a great moment when someone on Reddit is happy about something. So that is really the best.
To piggyback off of what Ian's saying, I think there is this really wide spectrum of how we're both collecting and evaluating kind of user data, big air quotes on that, because it can range from the really positive tweet about this or that comment on Reddit of a otherwise people go there to complain about everything, but whoa, okay, like they're not mad about this, huge win. And so those like little specific one-off signals are valuable. You know, they're like for everyone who made that comment, are there 1,000, are there 10,000 who thought the same way and just didn't say something? Um, Comparing that against work we do with Google, where they have really, really big, deep data infrastructure, and as we're kind of iterating through product ideas, like a really cool idea will get shot down really, really early because like we just know it won't perform the way we want it to, even though it's cool. But yeah, any flow we're actually building, like you can track the user through every step of it and know exactly, okay, 30% of people dropped off between step A and step B, and here's 5 ideas we have of how we can tweak step A so that 20% more people make it to step B and continue to riff off of that. The thing we don't do is ask users what we want. If we're doing user research, it's never in the form of, what do you want the app to do? What would you like from the website? You know, we're very much trying to come at it from the angle of, you know, what problems are you trying to solve, or what is your goal or objective? And then we can extrapolate out from that. Here's what the solution to the problem might be. There's also a lot of common tropes in this world, like net promoter score surveys. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but you'll often see this come up, you know, in an email or at the end of a transaction, where like, how likely are you to recommend this product to a friend? And in the world where that is applied, if you're getting anything below sort of 80% score on that, then you're sort of in this negative recursion loop of there's no virality to your product and it will not organically grow. It's a totally flawed mechanism often in how it's implemented because you can game it by putting it at a success state. If you're putting that question in front of a user who has just had a successful transaction, they just had a successful transaction. The product designer that decided to put that question there knows this user had a successful transaction, probably more likely to say, yeah, I'm likely to recommend this. And then that product manager gets a raise because their numbers went up. You missed all the users who didn't make it through checkout because they got frustrated or they hit some sort of flaw. So there is that sort of stickiness of you can mold data to say whatever you want it to say. But there can be a lot of value, especially in you know, a non-tech client sort of getting the more quantifiable validation of this is going to be an investment, but we've got signals of why it's worth making that investment because we can shift revenue by this much if the hypothesis is correct, or we can get this many more people to make it through your onboarding flow if we make these tweaks. And it can be a really, really valuable tool to justifying another round of work on a project.
I think it's like the Peter Drucker quote is like, what gets measured gets managed, right?
Yes, right. That's a great quote. Yeah,
it is. And I wish that I used more data. And I think that's like a big takeaway from just even listening to you guys. It's like, I should probably ask. I do ask at the beginning, like, what is the measure of success for the project? And usually it's like an aspirational goal. But I think it's like post-launching, it's like, what are we going to measure over the course of the next 3 to 6 months to make sure that, you know, all of the hypothesis and the work that we just did is validated, and where can we course correct? I think that's probably something, just even listening to you guys and understanding your process a little bit more, that I could probably take away, and something that anyone in the audience could do.
That's absolutely true. And whether it's sort of anecdotal or subjective or qualitative data, getting challenging feedback or even quantifiable, seeing the numbers not go in the direction is still a good thing, because now we have information that we can act on. And so there's a little bit of, especially in agency world, where, you know, I design something, I put it out in the world, and okay, move on to the next thing. The more you can stay attached to it beyond just sort of making sure it's letting its wings sort of unfurl as you want them to. There's just untapped opportunity and sort of saying like, okay, so like we hit objective A, B, and C, but we're actually not hitting objective D. We thought we would, but now we know that this is how folks are behaving in a way that was different than what we expected. And so we've got the legs for a new engagement now to really sink our teeth into this specific problem and how do we fix this aspect of what was maybe a really broad set of initial objectives.
And then how does that intersect with like a pricing model?
For the first engagement with a client, everything we do is hourly, but the notion of hourly stresses people out, especially when they have a fixed budget for something. So we'll tie it to the number of hours, but we'll give a strong estimate, like a good estimate for what the final thing will be, and then have a lot of language in our contract about how like we can back into this number and work towards it. And as we go through the discovery and design processes and obviously development, those can kind of shift around to be flexible. Like sometimes it's the timeline that's most important. Sometimes it's the budget that's most important. So we can be totally flexible on that. And as good as one's intentions are at the outset, there's always things that crop up, especially as you're starting to build it and discovering like problems with data that's being migrated into the new thing or any number of things. So yeah, we try and be flexible on that front. And then with future engagements, they tend to be more ongoing retainer type ones after that first engagement.
One thing that we've found has worked well for us as we've matured a little bit and the scopes of our projects have gotten bigger is that for, I would say, the first 5 years or so of our existence, the bigger the project got, the more likely we were to lose money on it, which seemed very counterintuitive to us for a while. You kind of jump from doing like $10,000, $20,000 projects where like, okay, like we're not even paying attention. We're just heads down working. It takes however many hours it takes and we launch it. And then at the end of the year, how much money do we make? Oh boy, that's not very much. As we got a little bit more disciplined and we got really diligent about tracking our time with everything that we did for ourselves, and as our team started to grow, we did start to build up more data of this type of project takes this many hours, and we spent this much time on strategy and this much time on design and this much time on development, and we got better at really knowing that a project like this will probably be in the 1,200-hour range or the 3,000-hour range or whatever it might be. And to what Ian was saying earlier is like, while we're still structuring our projects hourly, we do need to back into some budget that the client has for that initial engagement. However, when we have this opportunity to launch something and grow that project with the client, and especially if it's sort of a revenue driver or a core aspect of their business, we are much more open to taking like break even or even taking sometimes a somewhat significant loss on the initial engagement if we know that it's teeing things up for a long, fruitful relationship with that client. The first phase kind of has to be more kind of quote unquote waterfall rather than agile. We do need to learn who your audiences are and who you are as an organization and what we're building. And so you kind of go through the more linear steps for phase one. And then once it launches, now it, as Ian was saying, it kind of does need to get into this more rolling retainer model. And so even if we do end up taking kind of a big hit and over deliver by 10, 20, 50% of the budget to get sort of the version one exceptional, that does two things. It like buys us a lot of trust and leeway with the client. It's like an investment in sort of our future relationship with this client. And it sort of tees things up for us to then sort of roll into sometimes many year-long relationships where we're now just rolling on an hourly basis. They know we can deliver because we delivered already. And it's really about, okay, what's our roadmap for this month? And here's how much we're going to budget for it. And they trust us to allocate that budget appropriately as we're working with their team on whatever the given objective is.
Yeah. Is that an hourly agency rate that includes like padding and profit and like things of that nature, or is it straight up like this is the rate per like individual person, and then we're kind of combining those together? Because I guess like where my head is like, how do you accommodate profit or like margin or room for error inside of a hourly pricing model? So I'm curious if it's
Totally.
more complex than you're letting on.
And this is where our years of mistakes come into play.
This is probably the hardest aspect of our job still, like accurately estimating things, especially for an initial engagement. And I'd be lying if I said we've totally known.
To throw some more specific answers at that, when we're so let's say we're approaching a big CMS driven content platform that is going to involve, not yields small website, but big website. And we know we're probably in the 1,200 to 3,000 hour range total, because we've done several dozens of these, and collectively that's how much they often take. When we think about just what our agency level hourly rate is, we're just sort of working backwards as far as, here's kind of what our cost is per team member. Here's how many billable hours a team member should have in a year. And if that team member can maybe do, I don't know, like of 2,000 hours total, being 90% billable is exceptional. 80% billable is good, right? 70% is kind of as low as we should go for an individual contributor on the team who should be predominantly billable. We sort of have our inventory of here's how many hours we have to sell, basically. So we're a little bit like, so we just know this is how much your employee costs. This is how many billable hours they have. We initially estimate things out, giving ourselves in the realm of 100% margin as our starting number. So we'll say, this should take, let's say this should take 100 hours really. We'll budget this chunk of it at 200 hours, and then the cost. The hour buffer is about 50% on what the real time is. So like, there's going to be PM time, there's going to be meetings, there's going to be inefficiencies, there's going to be QA that discovers some issue that we need to loop back through. So like that sort of initial 50% buffer on the number of hours, and then the cost that we're just billing per employee has about 50% margin on what the cost of that employee is. So we have those sort of two layers of buffer sort of built in to how we're estimating things out. We bill through at least 50% more than what the employee costs, and we estimate at least 50% more than the amount of time we think it will take to do the thing. We end up eating into both of those, especially during an initial engagement, sometimes into the red slightly, if we know we want to really knock it out of the park and it's a worthwhile investment to ensure a long-term relationship with a great partner.
And that kind of gets into the other aspect of it, because you had mentioned the retainer aspect of your business, and then you only added one new client last year, you did 4 proposals, and I guess is it leaning towards more revenue based on retainers versus new initiated projects? What's kind of like the breakdown for the business at this moment in time?
90% retainer, 10% new engagement.
That's so cool, just because it's so different.
It has shifted strongly in that direction over the past handful of years. I would say 4 or 5 years ago, it was more closer to 50-50. I would say would be my best guess without pulling up QuickBooks and looking.
I think 90% might almost be too much, because the great thing about the smaller single engagements are you get to learn a new domain, a new client, a new industry, and sometimes it's nice to mix up these long multi-year engagements with something you can start greenfield, be done with in 4 to 6 months, and then move on to another thing. So I think we've always liked having a mix of the two, because it could get pretty dreary if you just have like one anchor product, and that is all you're working on. And as it gets more and more mature, the amount of creativity and day-to-day enthusiasm can really rapidly wane. So yeah, we definitely always tried to keep a mix.
Just from my general curiosity, because now where it seems like we're entering into this kind of like new age of like design subscription businesses, which is maybe just a fancy way of saying retainer, but I think that agencies, studios, companies structure them in different ways. Is it you're creating a custom retainer for that particular client? So is it we're offering X amount of hours that we're on call to do anything that pops up, or we're doing a specific project with you, but we know it's going to be X, we can dedicate X amount of hours per month. I am curious about how you're breaking it down and in how it's one profitable for you, but also effective for the client as well.
Totally. Yeah, it's been interesting to watch this new phase of design as a service starting to evolve. And we don't position it that way. That's certainly not how we sell ourselves, and definitely not for an initial engagement. I think that can make a lot of sense for individual product design practitioners or visual design practitioners. And it has that nice sort of low risk sort of entry point opportunity for new clients. Like, yeah, just try them out for a week and see how it goes. Um, uh, at this point, we know we need a sort of healthy runway for an initial engagement to be successful, and we don't do a lot of sort of try us out type initial engagements. The caveat to that is that for especially for earlier stage startup clients, like a Series A tech startup, it's more likely that we might do like a small design sprint with them where we're overhauling their design system and helping them work through a handful of key problems, and that could be structured as we're going to do 40 hours a week for 6 weeks as an initial engagement, and not be very prescriptive of how that needs to be applied beyond maybe some loose bullet points if here's some broad objectives that we're trying to accomplish. Um, for most of our engagements, it is a much more traditional initial. We're doing a $12,000 or 12,000 hour 0 to 1 launching version 1, and then once we're over that hump, then it more into okay. We've got this big shared roadmap that we've worked on together, and at that point, it is more likely, yes, we're allocating 160 hours a month that we will have our weekly check-ins as we're starting to work through this roadmap and recalibrating and reworking as we go. But even then, we're still usually sort of pacing those out in 12-week increments at a minimum. And it's not usually month to month, you get this many hours of design bandwidth and put in your ticket and we'll send it back. We try to avoid it becoming transactional. In all of these relationships, we're trying to be a member of the client's team, or our team is part of their team, and we're very, very integrated and working side by side towards whatever it is we're building or iterating on.
I mean, that makes it seem like a lot more human and more effective for them, because like my understanding maybe like prior to this conversation was leaning towards like set amount of time, and you kind of like pay the bill regardless of how much time it takes, and it's like very transactional and profitable for the agency, because they're kind of like some people that I have heard from, they're kind of like taking advantage of the situation in a way. So I was curious like how you were structuring it, and that I think is a healthy, like good way to do it so that you are truly a partner within that company.
Yeah. We keep using the word retainer, but it's not actually a retainer in that they're not prepaying for a tranche of hours like a lawyer or something like that. It's normal billing after work is completed. It's not they use it or lose it for money they've already paid situation.
Yeah. A better way to think of it is bandwidth planning for ourselves. We have X number of clients who are willing to budget up to X hours per month. And if we don't hit it all, we don't charge them for all of that. And then we might have some sort of surplus budget for them that can roll into the next month, or that can start to accrue when things are moving slowly. And then we can tackle a much bigger initiative with them when needs really ramp up.
Yeah, and again, like that's way more human. And I think the lawyer example is like perfect what you
Yeah.
said, Ian, because like I think that's sort of the world in which that's coming from and that I've always kind of heard it from. So it is like that kind of almost like vampiric, like sucking the client for their money kind of aspect.
Sure, some people do that as a model. I can imagine that souring client relationships if they feel like they're not getting what they paid for. But clearly it would be more profitable to have people paying for hours they're not using. But we've still found our kind of like ongoing relationship still quite good financially because not only are there dedicated hours ahead of time, but just you don't have to be the unpaid part of each project when you're doing smaller individual engagements one after another is there's a lot of time in finding a new project, going through all the emails back and forth, going through the interview process, writing proposals. And that really adds up, especially for smaller scope projects. So even just not having to include that time in these ongoing engagements really changes the calculus at what is the same hourly rate.
But I think it's important to maybe take a deep dive and maybe talk about what are some fundamental mistakes that kind of have reshaped or redefined your either process or how you run the company. Are there any kind of pivotal moments in the sort of 14 years that stand out to you as kind of monumentous in a way?
Yeah.
Since it's so related to what we were just talking about, the probably the biggest mistakes we've made are under budgeting massive projects and just we eat too much into our margin, and then it gets to a point where we're like, okay, we need to have a chat with the client, like this can't launch, and then the client is understandably angry and it just sours the relationship. So there were a few of those in the earlier years that are really painful to go through, especially because they're the bigger projects, they're the ones you've spent so much time on, and you see where you want it to end up, but no, you can't get there unless something changes. We've been much more careful since those first few years about guarding against that.
I just want to tap in on top of that, though, is that I think it was important that we were over delivering for the first several years that we existed as a company. When we started doing this, we were, I would say, above average for the amount of experience we had as far as designing and building things when we were getting into the game. We had no idea how to estimate something or budget something correctly. We would just get a yes and put our heads down and start designing and building things. And as Ian was saying, realize, oh my gosh, we've tapped out this budget and we're halfway done. And so then we just
with the budget, we're like, yeah, we can do that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Well, that could work. Yeah, right. And so then you just kind of go heads down and, trudge through it and getting progressively more bitter. But back then, at least, we would just, put our heads down, sink our teeth into it, grind through it, still launch something we were proud of because that really was our competency, was designing and building things, not budgeting and planning and communicating effectively when scope and budget were misaligned and all of those good things that you slowly start to learn through experience. So as we made more and more of those mistakes, we had a body of work that we could still be really proud of, but still compensating ourselves well below what our analogous market rates could have been if we were not working for ourselves. So it was this sort of slow exercise in discipline, both in just knowing how much a budget should be for a project of a varying range of scope, and then needing to navigate that when stuff starts to veer off course. And that's been a lifelong learning that we're getting better at, but we'll never have nailed, especially when you're doing a multi-thousand-hour strategy design and build project. On day one, we don't know what we're designing. We certainly don't know what we're building, but we're still trying to back into some sort of fixed launch budget. And so getting better at, okay, as we're rolling into strategy, what are the flags that could swing this off course? And can we course correct now? And then as we're rolling through design, it's still a recurring challenge we have where we over design what can actually be built with the available budget. And it's really, really hard to know that until it's almost too late. We don't have the budget to go back and redesign a simpler version of this at this point. And so being able to just catch those things earlier and knowing how to productively navigate that with the client has been the mistake we've made the most, I would say, and are hopefully getting better at, because the stakes get higher the bigger the project gets.
Is there something from like a leadership perspective that helped you to run the studio maybe more effectively, build team culture, or anything of that nature? So like a moving away from the budgeting, not we could talk about that for hours, and that's probably like a great conversation with beer. So
one thing we've learned over the years is being very careful who we hire. We do a lot of due diligence, and we don't rush to fill seats even when there's excess work, because having the right people is, everything to what we do. So we've never wanted to grow for the sake of growing. We just want to have enough people to be able to do the work that we want to do and that's coming through the door. So I think that is a mistake we have definitely made in the past that we've gotten a lot better at, just really being careful, having a thorough interview process and making sure, like, not just us, but that multiple people from our team are getting involved and helping us make the call of who's going to join the team.
And along these lines, making the very serious and tough call of letting someone go when they're not the right fit. It's easy to do when someone's really not good. That's never the case. There's never, very rarely been a scenario where we've actually hired someone who was a total dud. It has been the case where someone seems like they have potential. Maybe they start to grow a little bit over the first few months, but the expectations of where we needed to see them grow, it's just not happening at a pace that we need to see, and the amount of resources that it's taking to mentor this person, and we're not seeing the progress relative to that mentorship investment. That's where it gets really, really tricky, because very often we really like this person, we hired them for a reason, and they do show promise, but we're just not seeing the growth at the pace that we need, and there's that sort of hidden cost beyond them just not being fully leveraged. What's the cost across the rest of the team, and sort of helping to support this person and not getting to where it needs to go. So letting someone go soon enough when they're not the right fit is really, really hard. And we were terrible at that in the beginning. It was literally, we just weren't brave enough to have the hard conversation and let someone who could have probably thrived in the right environment move on to somewhere that was going to be a better fit sooner.
That bravery in like all aspects of like what we do, from how we speak to our clients, how we pitch work, how we push across like great ideas, how we interact with our team, or let someone go, or do the hard thing. I feel like that is the unexpected thing that is so difficult to learn from like a leadership perspective. And just to have that bravery when, you need to pay the bills, you want to keep everyone around, you want to keep everyone happy. It's definitely a challenge.
Yep. Our jobs can be to be the punching bag from both directions sometimes. Team frustrated about there not being enough hours to do this well, and client being upset that this budget is blowing out of control. It's like, okay, let's just try and navigate this as best we can.
Are there aspects that you look for with a new hire or a potential hire? Like what kind of is like the pseudo qualities of a perfect candidate?
There are many aspects to it. Something I think we both mentioned earlier is someone who fits more than one role. Like we're a small team and we all wear a lot of hats. So someone who can kind of slot in, or at least understand multiple parts of the process, is super valuable, even if they're being hired as a front-end developer. I think because we're all so busy and heads down, like Zeke and I still, like, over half of our time is still doing like project work, not running the company. So like everyone's time is, we're all super busy, essentially. So people who have good self-motivation I think is something we found in our best team members, so that they're not waiting to hear what should I do next and just like twiddling their thumbs in the meantime. They're being proactive. They're coming up with things that they should do next, or asking the questions about what should be improved, coming up with non-project related things that they could do.
Curiosity, problem solving, sort of a hunger to do exceptional work. The sort of hard skills, we kind of need to see evidence of that. But beyond that, are you a strong writer? Is there evidence that you can think clearly, that you can communicate well, especially in a predominantly remote world? We need the self-starter thinker who can carry things through and cross the discipline divide as much as possible to sort of be the glue that we can't always be, Ian and myself, on any given project.
You had brought this up in our questionnaire, but is the internet dying? Is the internet as fun as it used to be? I guess that's like a huge question. I think like it's something that is on top of mind for me, but I'm definitely curious to hear your thoughts and perspective.
Is the internet dying? I'm terrified that it might be. And I don't think it's dying from like a protocol standpoint. HTTPS is not going away. The internet that I think we grew up with, that our professional coming of age spanned, was this cozy participatory world where all of my favorite designers had design blogs, and you would go to an event apart and get to meet them in real life, and really nerd out on what was new in the CSS spec that just came out, and maybe I'm just more maybe that exists and I'm just more disconnected from it at this point. But sort of that part of it aside, as the more existential fear for me is with the barrier to entry going away for AI generated content. There's no reason for people to write blog posts anymore if I can't easily monetize it with ads anymore. Like there was like a thriving business where people put good content on the internet because you can make a little bit of ad revenue, and Joe Schmo plumber can write the best plumbing blog about what shower valve to put in your shower, and there's really good authoritative content out there, and that's gone. If I search what's the best shower valve, I'm going to find 4 pages of AI generated articles that are all generating the exact same, mostly product placements, because they scraped from somewhere that was doing a paid listicle. And so we've got robots generating content, and then SEO bubbles up that content, and at a certain point this wheel breaks. And we just got robots talking to robots, and that's my existential internet is breaking fear right now.
Social media has gotten pretty toxic, which obviously to some extent is the internet's fault, in the sense that it enabled global communication, but it's also just a reflection of kind of toxic times right now. And these things tend to oscillate. And I mean, this kind of toxic discourse happened in like the 1800s, and things came back around through some kind of phoenix rising from the ashes moment, which normally is a pretty painful one, but that's for the future. But like, to the point about AI, I'm not too scared about AI, because I think it's just going to become a tool like computers were when computers first came out. Like, everyone was like, oh, computer's going to take my job if you were a secretary or something like that. And certainly there was probably some shakeup when that happened, but it really just gave people new tools and created different jobs and new opportunities. And I think there's definitely going to be I think AI is just going to become a tool that is, as it gets more complex, you're going to need to know and have training on how to use it efficiently and effectively. And I don't know if it's going to be like a level up situation for humanity in the way the internet was or other major technological breakthroughs. I mean, people clearly seem to think it is at this moment. No one's going to keep using Google indefinitely if the results get shittier and shittier. So someone's going to create something better, and Google as a search site will be unseated eventually, just like Google unseated Yahoo and Excite and web crawler.
Is there going to stop being a reason for people to put websites on the internet, though, if ChatGPT or Perplexity can answer my question? How do the answers get there is what concerns me. Not that Google specifically as a search engine gets worse. It's that the web as a medium for publishing starts to lose the economic incentive for people to put things there. We're in the business of making websites, and it's already a non-obvious question of why does client need a website? Like if you're e-com, then yeah, like that's your storefront. People need to buy things there. That's not going away anytime soon. If like we're a little bit more in the sort of product end of the spectrum, which has a little bit of a safety net, and that we're mostly not doing marketing websites, but we do a lot of that also. But when we're doing like a website for a media company or a publishing company, their business models are seriously threatened right now because search is breaking, because the ad model is breaking, and that's where I think there is a little bit of not necessarily existential risk that we're going to lose jobs because AI is going to replace us as programmers. It's more of a why do people put content on the internet outside of a product context? And I don't know. We don't know yet.
I still think to some extent the same answer applies in that, I mean, a lot of content on the internet is topical and recent, so AI has to pull it from somewhere. And if people aren't writing that topical content and putting it on the internet, AI is going to have nowhere to source it from, and the whole thing will collapse. And then people are going to start having to write new content because no one can trust anything AI is saying because it's referencing things that happened 10 years ago. But yeah, I mean, that's a bit glib. And yeah, I am worried, especially about small publishers. Like the New York Times is going to be just fine. But there are a lot more journalists than the Times journalists in the country and the world now. I mean, Substack seems to be doing it moderately successfully in a way of a subscription to individual people. I don't know how scalable that is as a way to fund journalism.
Content on the internet is such like an interesting thing because there's obviously like so many different platforms. There's like Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Substack, Medium, and there's like different monetization channels or subscriptions, memberships for varying degrees of these things. There's like Patreon where you can fund someone like for creating content. But it's definitely a different landscape of content than like the going on the forums or the blogs from like the early internet and like the just like making things or putting out ideas because you could. And then all of a sudden like there was like an advertising incentive model and that got ramped up to 11. So like creating content for the sake of creating content, like obviously there's people still doing it, but it does seem like everyone, from Gen Z and above, like I'm going to create this thing because I know I can incentivize it through like an ad model or like I can make money off of it. And like, I don't know if the create something just because it is existing as much as it used to prior.
Fonts of this knowledge, like on the development side, like Stack Overflow, someone has answered your question almost certainly before. And people are spending a lot of time doing that. But I think when you were talking earlier about what makes the perfect product, the most perfect product in my mind is Wikipedia. And the fact that it has succeeded is still a miracle to me. And it's not like the best designed, like if you're editing it, it's not the most user-friendly, certainly. But just in terms of the goals they have achieved, I can think of no internet thing that has had a greater impact.
It's a marvel, and it gives me hope in humanity.
Yeah, that and like Craigslist is like something like a $4 billion company or something like that. we can have AI fact check that, but it's something crazy like that. And it's all just like user driven, basically.
Yeah.
And it just still looks the same as it always did. And as we're kind of winding down here, I like to ask if there's any last words, wise words of wisdom that you would share with the audience, or even like the perspective of like your younger self, because a lot of designers on here will be younger, or even our peers, and just trying to learn and connect with you guys on a different level.
Bite off things that are more than you can chew, because that's how you actually learn stuff, rather than doing the same thing over again. Just like say yes to something, you're like, shit, I have no idea how I can possibly do this. And then you have a deadline and someone is paying you money to do it, you will figure it out. And you'll know a lot more by the end.
That's true. 100%.
As one advances through their career as a designer, it's easy to let your knowledge and perhaps wisdom get in your way, and it's easy to kill an idea too quickly because you know a pattern that already works, or not approach something because you don't think it'll be profitable enough, and making sure you are intentional about being risky, breaking rules, living in the naiveness of of being able to just try things, and it doesn't work, but then I learned something, and then I found a better solution because I didn't know how to do it, and I just tried something and I shipped it. The freedom of not knowing is really, really, really valuable, and that starts to slip away the more things you've seen and the more things you've done. And so not getting in your own way is a thing that requires intentionality and focus. But that's where interesting, cool things happen, because one isn't doing the solution that they know will work, and is able to sort of carve out that space to try and fail a little bit.
Get stuck in our own patterns and way, for sure.
Ask lots of people for advice, and take the time to be really, really critical with what's working and not working. And I'm thinking of this more through the lens of building a design business, more so than executing successful design projects. In that we spent a lot of time doing the wrong thing over and over again before we really kind of took a step back and looked at it and said, yeah, we're not budgeting these correctly, or yeah, we're not, our hourly rates, just the math doesn't work. We haven't actually worked out that math. Or this proposal structure doesn't really make sense because we've been staring at it for 4 years now, and it made sense when we wrote it, but we are doing different types of projects with different types of clients, and we need that new perspective. Or the way we're writing our job listings made sense when we originally wrote them, but we need a new team member who recently joined to say, here's what is actually unique about TypeCode, and this is why it's cool to work here, and that's not being reflected in your job listings right now. And so being able to both seek out that external perspective and actually act on it.
Learn CSS, even as a designer. That's how they do it. You will be a diamond in the rough.
That is really good advice. Maybe I'll start learning, because it's been years since I've tried.
It's so important.
Should designers write code is such a tired debate, but it's still relevant. Being able to flex deeper into the design world as a development, or flex deeper into the development world as a designer is invaluable in what that unlocks.
Yeah, it just makes you a better collaborator in that way. So you can speak their language, and hopefully you can teach them, and they can speak yours right back to you.
Totally.
Absolutely.
I guess if I were to summarize a little bit of what we have been talking about, it really is that synergy between design and development working together, like we were just saying, but also how that translates into your client management relationships all throughout. I think being a good human, we touched on multiple times, which we probably shouldn't have to in a podcast format, but it's always good to hear again that there are companies out there doing good work for good people and being good to their people as well. And I think that is essential. It's not just this hot debate between product design versus like creative web design. We're all designing with intentionality, and we all want more beauty in the world and more efficient, like effective tools to play with in the world. So be nice to each other on Twitter. Maybe that goes back to be a good person, damn it.
So, well, thank you very much for having us. This was a blast.
Agreed.
No, it really was. Thank you, guys. So to the audience, remember that we're all legendary and have an amazing story of our own. So on that journey, take the time to be kind, grind, and unwind, and let's make the world a better and more creative place. Zeke, Ian, thanks so much again. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Cheers. If you want more great content like this, you've stuck around this long, so make sure you subscribe, like, and please share your favorite moment from the episode, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.